On April 12, 1861, the bloodiest battle that the U.S. has ever engaged in began, the American Civil War. More than 620,000 American soldiers lost their lives in a short time period of just 4 years. This would be equivalent to about 5.2 million Americans dying in the year 2008. There were many different things that led to the Civil War. It is said that the war started because of slavery, the economy, and states' rights. The North did not believe in slavery, but the South did. The North protested about slavery, but the Confederates believed that slavery was good because it saved them money. They had the idea that they were saving money by not paying slaves to do their work. The Northeast and Midwest regions had machines and factories, therefore they did not need slaves. Since the Southeast region didn't have those things, they relied heavily on slavery. Slavery caused the nation to start fighting over who would decide if the territories were or without slavery. Finally, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina seceded from the United States. However, there were 5 slave states bordering the North that chose not to secede and remained in the Union. These 5 states included Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Kentucky played a vital role in the Civil War. Kentucky had ties to both the North and the South. The tobacco, whiskey, snuff, and flour produced in the state were shipped to southern states via the Ohio and Mississippi River, and the northern markets by rail. Kentucky could not afford to lose either of these markets in order to sustain their economy. Politically, Kentucky was proud of its role in preserving the Union. Although the northern and southern states always had bitter feelings towards one another, Kentucky had managed to stay out of the conflict for more than 30 years. At the time of the Civil War, the Kentucky governor, Beriah Magoffin, was a Southern sympathizer, while the representatives in the legislation supported the Union. When the time came for the legislature to vote whether to secede from the Union or join the Confederacy, the representatives voted to remain neutral. This angered many Kentuckians. By law, Kentucky was a slave state. The slave trade was a very profitable business for many Kentuckians. However, most Kentuckians did not own slaves. The few who did were wealthy plantation owners who stood to lose a lot if slavery were abolished. There was one specific person that played a key role in Kentucky remaining neutral, John J. Crittenden. John was a true Kentuckian. He was born and educated in Kentucky. Soon, he became the best-known lawyer in western Kentucky. He was chosen Speaker of the House in 1815 and 1816. During these years, John also served in the War of 1812. Beginning in 1835, with his election to the U.S. Senate, his career was generally connected to the federal government. After Lincoln's election, John introduced the Crittenden Compromise. This was his attempt to resolve sectional differences on the eve of the Civil War. Crittenden's compromise effort was defeated by Lincoln's strong stand against any extension of slavery into the territories. Nevertheless, John stood with the government and continued to support Lincoln's position that it was the right and duty of the government to maintain the Union. Kentucky's divided loyalties were reflected in Crittenden's own family. 2 of his sons would lead opposing armies during the Civil War, serving as generals. The younger of the 2 sons, Thomas Crittenden. He was a lawyer and a politician, like his father. After studying law and being admitted to the bar, Thomas joined the U.S. Army during the Mexican-American War as a volunteer. Later, he served as Lieutenant Colonel of the 3rd Kentucky Volunteer Army. Following this, he served as the U.S. Consul in Liverpool, England. Thomas chose to support the Union and joined the Union Army on September 27, 1861, and was promoted to Major General in July of 1862. He fought at Shiloh, Perryville, Stones River, and Chickamauga. Thomas, along with another commander, was blamed for the losses at Chickamauga and were relieved of duty. Soon after, they were exonerated and acquitted of the charges. After this, Thomas continued to command in the field through the Battle of Cold Harbor. Although Thomas resigned from the military in December of 1864, he re-entered the Army in 1867. He then served until 1881. After the war, he served as the state treasurer of Kentucky. He died in Annandale, Staten Island, New York, and is buried in Frankfort, Kentucky in the family cemetery plot. The oldest son of John J. Crittenden was George Crittenden. Like his father and brother, George was a lawyer and also served as a general in the Civil War. Unlike his father and brother, George served in the Confederate Army. George began his military career at the age of 16 at West Point in 1827. He graduated in 1832 and served as a second lieutenant in the Black Hawk War. He resigned his commission in 1833 and entered Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky to become a lawyer. In 1842, George moved to Texas and joined the Army of the Republic of Texas. During his time serving in the Army of the Texas Republic, George was captured by the Mexican forces. He remained there until President Andrew Jackson interceded on his behalf. In 1846, he rejoined the U.S. Army as a captain and served in the Mexican War. Against his father's wishes, George resigned from the U.S. Army and joined the Confederate Army as a colonel. By November of 1861, he had been promoted to Major General and was given command of the Southern effort to liberate Kentucky. George fought at the Battle of Mill Springs in Kentucky as well as at Logan's Crossroads prior to having been found drunk on the battlefield. Then he was relocated to another post in Mississippi. After having been found drunk with his troops once again, he was at risk of being court-martialed. Before this occurred, he resigned in 1862. He did continue to serve in the Confederate Army, but only as a volunteer. After the war, George moved back to Kentucky and served as a state librarian. He died in 1880. He is buried near his father and brother in the Crittenden family plot in the Frankfort Cemetery. These were difficult and confusing times for everyone, in particular the border states, because they had to decide upon a course that might make enemies of parents, brothers, and neighbors. Eventually, the war would end and families and neighbors would have to learn to piece their life back together.